How is it going, guys? Malagant here. We're going to be talking about how to maximize the damage that you can deal in Diablo with any sort of character, any, character of your choosing, or the skill of your choosing, or the type of damage that you're choosing. What are the steps that you can take to get stronger and go towards like higher and higher damage. Or perhaps this video is going to help you out basically, weighing two different stats or two different Paragon boards, making that decision, which one would be better in the future, etc. So hopefully it's going to be useful. That being said, please leave a like and remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm creating quite often Diablo 4 content. So the first things right off the bat is going to be having a strong weapon or a weapon set with an offhand, obviously. So higher item power level definitely helps you big time because it increases the unique stat called damage per second. And then obviously there's going to be attack speed that's kind of involved in this as well. Now I'd like you to think about this like attack speed, higher DPS per second, and also resource control, apart from the other things that I'm going to be explaining, because this trio or trifecta, let's say, is a very unique combination. In Diablo 4, no matter how hard you can hit, you usually end up spending some resource. It is very important for you to get to a state where you can actually continue spamming your ability instead of doing like, generate, spend, generate, spend. So most of the characters, unfortunately, in Diablo 4 is playing, at least in the early game, generate, spend kind of a playstyle. This doesn't necessarily, however, mean that in the late game this is going to be like that. In fact, this character right over here, when I play it, in fact, like right on your screen, there's no generator. So I have managed to come up to a state where I don't need to generate anymore. I can just continue spending. So I would like you to consider that as one of your biggest DPS boosts, because at the end of the day, whatever it is that is hitting the hardest in your bars, or whichever spell that you're maining, you kind of want to like spam that more, and it comes down to resource management. So therefore I would like you to consider mana cost reduction or spirit cost reduction for a druid, for instance, or resource generation. These stats, as perhaps useless as they may seem to be, they are actually incredibly good in the late game, as long as you can come up to a sweet spot where you don't need to generate by casting something else anymore. Okay, so consider that that's in my opinion one of the biggest DPS boosters in this game. However, there's another thing, as I said in this trifecta, the other thing is attack speed. So when you reach to a sweet spot when it comes to like regenerating enough, you could increase your attack speed to spam more, therefore, fit in more attacks within the certain amount of like mana regeneration that you have. So if you're capable of increasing your mana regeneration more than you can spend, then you can in fact gain attack speed in return, right? The more attack speed you have, the more attacks you're going to be fitting in, therefore the more mana you're going to be consuming. This exact same thing is going to be working for every single character, so therefore attack speed is crazy important as well, but it is only important when you have enough mana. Well, it is exponentially more important when you have enough mana, more than you need, or when you have enough resource, let's say more than that you need, and you can fit in even more attacks. So it is incredible when it comes to your DPS increase if you can come up to a state where your resource is, very healthy, and then you can start increasing your attack speed as well. You can obviously look into using a single-hander to have increased attack speed in return to a two-hander. Remember that your offhand in most cases are going to be giving you the DPS as well. The staff, or like a two-hander in this game, most of the time the DPS difference is not the biggest deal. What is the biggest deal is that the staff or a two-hander is coming from, coming with like an aspect increase. So 200% stronger aspect that you put on top of that. But obviously one-hander and a two-hander would bring you double aspect at 100% of its value. So apart from this trifecta, we have to remember that like we can support our abilities, make some sort of like a synergy, obviously. So if you're playing cold, try to support the cold from your skill tree and your paragons, but we're not going to be delving into that the biggest, or in detail. But in short, remember to put as many points into your main ability as possible, and at the same time remember that like after filling it up, there are certain other places that you can find more pluses as well. So in my case, chain lightning can actually get +4 from gloves, and I have gotten just that, +4 to chain lightning. So stuff like this definitely increases the base damage of your main ability. So far, like, you will be scaling it even further. It is very important, just like the DPS damage per second of your weapon. So let's talk about a little bit more fixes after this section. How the damage calculates is that there's something called additive, and then there's something called multiplicative when it comes to these values that you can gain from paragons, your passive skill tree, and obviously the items, right? The affixes on the items. And therefore, you're going to be deciding what to go for, where, you know, in which item or which kind of like a route you're going to be taking in your paragons according to this. So what is additive is that, like, there are certain different values in the game that are coming together, adding on top of each other, and then calculating. So therefore, they are additive. And in this game, you can get a lot of those. So let's give some examples. Most of the Paragon board, in fact, is additive. Some of the values are very high, while others are pretty low. So therefore, their impact is going to be pretty low. So for instance, if I look over here, it says damage to chilled enemies. This would be sort of like an additive to all the damage that you can think of. So all damage increases, damage to chilled enemies, damage to burning enemies, you know, damage when the enemy is stunned, or chilled damage, or cold damage. So all these type of like damages in this game, they're going to be coming together, and then they're going to be calculating. So they are additive. So they're not the biggest impact, but when you add things up, they obviously make some difference. But as I said in this video, I'll try to like make it so, I'll try to make it clear so that like you can at least, you know, have some sort of like an understanding to what is bigger impacts for your character specifically. Even though it is additive, for instance, the close damage increase in this case is like 60%. So that's a big value, you know, it would actually make quite a lot of difference right over there. The same thing can be said right over, these are very good values. Right over here, for instance, almost 90% damage to crowd-controlled enemies. So this would be additive on top of like all the stuff that I have said, but 90% is a big value. So obviously just a single glyph making that much of a difference is pretty big. I would like you to think about like the values when it comes to, even though if it's additive or multiplicative. Another thing that I'm going to tell you is that how do you understand if something is multiplicative from like a writing? So if it's like a legendary aspect, or if it's a season 1 malignant heart, if it is a glyph proc, for instance, or if it's a passive in your skill tree. You can easily understand from the explanation when it says an X right next to the explanation or the percentage value. So in this case, it says you deal 10% X increased damage to slowed or chilled enemies, or instead 20% in fact when they're stunned or frozen. So this is a multiplicative value. You can also go into right over here to the glass cannon. You can see, you know, 18% X. That is going to be multiplicative. You can do the same for some other Paragon stuff as well. So this basically multiplicative is written in the sense that like it's going to have an X right next to it. Most of the time, that's how you understand it. Let's delve into what sort of stats that you want to maximize because they are multiplicative, right? I would like you to remember the trifecta that we talked about at the beginning. That's, in my opinion, one of the most. Okay, so afterwards there are layer coming up, right? The whole additive things that we have talked about just now. Obviously, inevitably, you're going to be boosting these from various different stuff, like your, you know, your Paragon tree, and then you're going to be boosting them from your perhaps some skills and perhaps some items as well. But you want to be taking the most amount of multiplicative other things. So every single character will have to go for crits for the most part, unless you're playing damage over time. So the crit is going to be one of the certain specific conditions. So if you manage to crit, then you have a new multiplier in line. So you want the crit as often as possible with almost any character, as I said, unless it's like damage over time. In that case, you want to like activate critting so that like you have insane amounts of a new multiplier where you can also increase this multiplier, which is called crit damage. So your crit chance and crit damage is going to be an incredible impact to your character. As long as you can manage to crit as often as possible, you will have like a higher, you know, crit damage that you can increase as well, and they go hand to hand, and they're obviously crazy multiplicative. Another one is vulnerable. This is going to be crazy as well because it has some sort of like a double dipping effect where when you make the enemy vulnerable, you're already dealing more damage to them because it is vulnerable to begin with, and then you can increase the amount of vulnerable damage that you can deal to something. It just works exactly like that. It increases the amount of multiplicative damage that you deal to a vulnerable unit is going to be increasing big time. So another one of the biggest things is vulnerable. But just like crit damage, I would like you to realize this, vulnerable is a condition as well. You need to have a reliable way to instantly make your target vulnerable with your character, okay? So otherwise, it does not work. So, but it is so big that almost every single character will unfortunately have to go for it. And you will need to figure out a way to put vulnerable to your target. So for instance, for Barbarian, I think Rogue is capable of doing it. And I think Druid is capable of doing it. The glyph called Exploit is in fact instantly putting vulnerable to their targets for like 4 or 5 seconds, maybe even 6 seconds, excuse me, I don't really remember exactly, but the sorcerer over here is not capable of doing that, so therefore I would need to find a new way to put instant vulnerability to my targets, and in that case it could be Frost Nova, it could be like an enchantment or Frozen Orb, etc. But this puzzle is something that I need to figure out, and it will be something that you will need to figure out for your character as well, to instantly put vulnerability reliably, not really, you know, you prefer not to have like a percentage chance. You kind of want to like instantly put a vulnerability to a boss, to an elite pack where you collect together, etc., and then pop them up. And in that case, you want to get as much vulnerable damage as possible because it is insane. As I said, it's absolutely insane. These two multiplicative values are crazy big. All right, so one last multiplicative layer that we are going to be talking about is going to be the main stat. In fact, every single character out there has a main stat for themselves. So in the sorcerer, it is intelligence. Obviously, when you come into the game and mouse over here, it's gonna say increased skill damage for 699 intelligence. I'm getting 69.9%. Nice. Skill damage increase. This is all like absolutely multiplicative as well. It's one of the biggest layers, again, because it is maybe even arguably the biggest layer. It's not that easy to stack because it's going 0.1 value. So, you know, basically 10 intelligence is ending up having, you know, 1% damage increase. So in that case, it's like a little bit of a lower case. But what I meant is like it's the biggest impact is because it doesn't really need a condition if you think about it. Like if you can stack as much intelligence as possible, it's going to be having insane amounts of damage increase on your character. To be perfectly honest with you, I think my character, even though it is pretty strong, could definitely have so much more intelligence than this. And I would like you to consider this. Like let's have intelligence is not calculated on my character and every single else is calculated, and we do have a specific number that is calculated now, and then we multiply it with 70%, increase it. So now we have like the new number, which is my character's damage number, let's say, okay? But if I had 1000 intelligence, we would have multiplied that number with 100%, and now we have a new number. The difference between those two numbers are going to be pretty massive. You know what I mean? So that is why these type of things are like very, very interesting, and that's also why I have a bad weapon over here, for instance. Speaking of this, I'll also give you a couple more examples. So in this case, core damage and damage to burning enemies on my weapon are pretty bad stats. Unlike some YouTube videos, in fact, core skill damage is unfortunately not multiplicative. It doesn't have its own buckets or whatever, if you want to talk about damage buckets. Also, excuse me, I'm derailing quite a bit, but Vudio has a very, very good damage calculation or damage explained video. In fact, I learned a lot from it. In fact, pretty sure like that was the first video that I really found extremely useful. I'll link it in the description down below if you'd like to check it out as well. It's much more technical than this video, and it will explain to you like how things are working pretty much. And so core skill, unlike some other creators made videos about it, you know, it is not really multiplicative whatsoever. So it is not a good stat to have over there. I would have liked to have something like lightning skill damage, for instance, so that like lightning's crit damage, actually, excuse me, that would have been very, very big for me because I'm mostly lightning, and it would have increased my crit damage. On top of that, the damage to burning enemies, terrible stat right over there. That's almost like 2 paragon points or something. Incredibly bad stat. So my weapon is unfortunately not good whatsoever. I would have liked to have intelligence, for instance, right? So int 100 int over there, instead of like 699, it would have been 799, and then we would have been calculating from 80%. It would have made a massive difference on my character. So that is also the goal of this video, trying to like guide you towards the right selections for your character, specifically just, you know, so that like you know what you're doing, and at the same time you don't really need a guide, because this video's, you know, goal is to basically teach you for every single class out there in a simplified manner, so that like you know what you're searching for, and you can pretty much like weigh the differences between 2 weapons immediately, because it all comes down to, you know, first I need to crit, I need to put vulnerability on my target, you know, I need to have a high item level weapons, let's say, because they have DPS, and they have increased DPS when they have higher item power. And then on top of that, I need to make sure like these conditions are right. And then on top of that, I need to have like maximum amounts of main stats and maximum amounts of these percentages that has X next to them, right? So, and then you're going to be blasting in this game pretty much. Thank you so much for watching, YouTube. I'll catch you next time. Peace out.